From what I've seen in Japan, the post-rotation meta is dominated by existing archetypes like Charizard EX, Lugia VStar, and Snorlax Stall, but a few new Temporal Forces decks have carved a niche. In this video, I'll be showing you the best new decks coming to Pokemon TCG Live on Thursday, March 21st, complete with lists in the comments so you can easily copy and paste them into Live and start playing as soon as the set drops. Is Roaring Moon the actual best new deck from Temporal Forces? Based on Japanese tournament results, I'd say it's probably tied with the second place deck, but since Roaring Moon is a fully new deck, I put it first. There are several different ways to play Roaring Moon, though the core strategy always remains the same. I'll start things off with this first place list, which features 4 Roaring Moon, 4 Koraidon, 3 Fluttermane, and 2 Roaring Moon EX. Obviously, the main Pokemon here is Baby Roaring Moon. For 2 Darkness Energy, it does 70 base damage, plus 10 more damage for each ancient card in your discard pile. That means you're going to be discarding a lot of cards every single turn. It also means you'll have to do a balancing act when it comes to the best time to play Explorer's Guidance versus the best time to play Professor Sada's Vitality. As someone who hasn't gotten their toes on any of these cards yet, I'd say it's almost always better to go second with Roaring Moon, just like how it's almost always better to go second with Roaring Moon EX so you can play a supporter on turn 1. Let's start with Explorer's Guidance. When you play it, you look at the top 6 cards of your deck and put 2 into your hand. The other 4 get discarded. Yeah, there will definitely be some tough choices to be had. But on the bright side, unlike Colress's Experiment, the cards go to the discard pile, not the lost zone. The problem with Explorer's Guidance is that you don't accelerate energy in the process, so if this is your turn 1 supporter, it's probably going to be a bad turn 1. Even though it doesn't help build up your damage, Sada is the better turn 1 supporter, so long as you can accelerate an energy onto 2 different Pokemon. Yeah, just like Roaring Moon EX, there is going to be some lackluster turn 1s here and there, but after that, the deck should run fairly smoothly. Since you have 4 Earthen Vessel and a Radiant Greninja, getting that energy in the discard pile quickly shouldn't be an issue. Then it's just a case of finding Sada, which is helped along by the 4 copies of Pokegear. In terms of attackers, your 2 main ones, Roaring Moon and Koraidon, only require 2 energy. That means a manual attachment and Sada have you ready to go. For Roaring Moon EX, which has a 3 energy attack cost, there's 2 copies of Dark Patch, which accelerates a Darkness energy from your discard pile to one of your bench Darkness Pokemon. The EX is mainly there to deal with super high HP Pokemon, as Frenzied Gouging can just one-shot anybody, though Roaring Moon does deal 200 damage to itself in the process. In total, a typical Roaring Moon deck will run between 25 and 30 ancient cards, meaning Roaring Moon should be able to take big one-hit KOs towards the end of the game. You'll discard those cards with a mix of Explorer's Guidance and Earthen Vessel, and each time your opponent takes a knockout, they're boosting the damage Roaring Moon deals. It's basically Mad Party on steroids, which would explain why your ball count is so low. Other successful lists in Japan completely strip out the Roaring Moon EX, focusing solely on the single prize ancient Pokemon. The strategy is the same, get as many ancient cards in the discard pile as quickly as possible, except now you don't have a 2 prize liability, and you also don't have the easy one-shot power of the EX. Or you can Hannah Montana your deck and turn it into the best of both worlds. On one side, you have the power of Baby Roaring Moon, able to take meaningful knockouts while forcing your opponent to play aggressively in order to not lose the prize trade. On the other side, if your opponent does get a little too aggressive trying to keep pace, you can change the strategy to Great Tusk, milling 4 cards per turn. For your Ace spec, Awakening Drum appears to be the most popular option in Japan, able to draw you a card for each ancient Pokemon you have in play. The other option is Prime Catcher, which is both a gust and a switch. Since Roaring Moon plays low counts of switch, you might prefer it over the potential 5 or 6 draw of the drum. I hope you stocked up on lotion because it's time to give your opponent an Iron Handy. Now, I understand that Iron Hands EX isn't a new card, but it's the Iron Crown EX and Baby Miraidon that allow this whole thing to work, so I'm giving it the second spot. How does this thing work exactly? Well, step 1, go second. There's not really a reason to go first. That's because you almost always want your first turn to end with an attack from the new Miraidon. For a single energy, it does 40 damage, then accelerates any 2 basic energy from your deck to your future Pokemon however you like. Realistically, the only times where you won't be using Miraidon turn 1 is when you load up an Iron Hands EX with Electric Generator and start amping right away. Whatever the case, between Electric Generator and Miraidon's attack, you want to get 4 energy on Iron Hands as quickly as possible. That way you can use Amp You Very Much and take an extra prize card with each knockout. While it starts out at 120 base damage, 4 Iron Crown EX turns that into 200. Add a future booster, now it's 220. And if you're shocked by the lack of switch cards in the deck, don't forget that Future Booster also gives future Pokemon free retreat. But a Future Booster isn't always the best choice for Iron Hands. Early on, you'll want to attach a Heavy Baton to Iron Hands. So when it's knocked out, you can take 3 energy from it and spread it to your bench Pokemon however you like. Just remember that Heavy Baton only works on Pokemon with 4 retreat, so only give it to Iron Hands. And if you think the loss of Battle VIP Pass hurts the deck, don't worry because Techno Radar exists. Simply discard a card from your hand, then go and get any 2 future Pokemon. Since this deck is all about picking and choosing your targets wisely, Prime Catcher should be the ace spec of choice. But Reboot Pod is a close second. As if there weren't enough energy accelerating cards in here, Reboot Pod attaches an energy from your discard pile to each of your future Pokemon. The list I'm showing you right now includes some potentially unnecessary Pokemon. There's Iron Boulder EX, which can do up to 140 damage with its first attack as a fighting type, while also putting 8 damage counters on whatever Pokemon hits it the following turn. Should the need arise, you can attack with Mew EX in this deck, though it will take some finagling with Heavy Baton. And if you're tired of giving Iron Handies and would prefer some Hyper Blowers, there's Iron Bundle. It's nothing crazy. If it's on your bench, you can activate its ability and force your opponent to choose a new active Pokemon. As you'd expect, there's several different ways to play the Future Box Iron Hands deck. This version right here runs 3 copies of Gift Energy, so when the Pokemon it's attached to is knocked out, you draw up to 7 cards. It's also super straightforward, getting rid of all the bells and whistles and just trying to make Iron Hands' job as easy as possible. However you decide to play this archetype come March 21st, just make sure you bone up on your math, because you'll be doing a lot of it. Unlike Snorlax Stall, which is a boring Indegenerate deck, Great Tusk Mill is an exciting Indegenerate deck. Instead of making games go on as long as possible until your opponent either gives up because they have better things to do like lotion their feet, or until you hit their final switch card with Airy, Great Tusk games will go by fairly quickly. Ultimately, if you're looking for the easiest new Temporal Forces deck to play, this is it. And honestly, the only reason I didn't put it higher is because I want to discourage people from playing it. The strategy is simple. Always choose to go second and hope you start a Great Tusk. If not, you could try and get Jet Energy or Rescue Board, but most likely you're just going to have to say goodbye to your active Pokemon. Unless it's Pidgeot V, you 100% want to manually retreat that into literally anybody else. The only reason Pidgeot is in the deck is because it stops you from decking out. Its ability, Vanishing Wangs, allows you to shuffle Pidgeot back into your deck, but it has to be on the bench for it to activate. You never ever want this thing to be on the field when your turn ends. Once you have a Great Tusk in the active spot, the deck kind of goes on autopilot. Use Radiant Greninja to discard your basic energy, thus activating Professor Sada's Vitality. Use Sada to spread around energy to your Great Tusk, prepping them for an attack. Otherwise, use Explorer's Guidance and attach a double Turbo Energy. The reason you play 4 Sada, 4 Explorers, 4 Pokegear, and 3 Palpad is because you have to play an Ancient Supporter every turn to use Great Tusk to its fullest potential. At its base level, Great Tusk mills 1 card from your opponent's deck. But if you play an Ancient Supporter, you mill 4 total. Using basic math, that's 20 cards in 5 turns. Obviously not enough to completely deck them out, so you have to stall them. Use Counter Catcher to bring up a Pokemon like Babarrel, which is either hard to retreat or not a great attacker. While they're scrambling to get it out of the active, you're milling your way to victory. Alternatively, if you think you've sent all of their switch cards to the discard pile, there's less with the losses of Escape Rope and Cross Switcher, Counter Catcher someone who can't attack and stick it in the active with Mawile's Tempting Trap. While they keep drawing a card each turn, you keep recycling Pidgeot V, meaning you never deck out but they eventually will. The same strategy applies to Mimikyu. It can't be damaged by V or EX Pokemon, so bring up one of those and they can't do anything. And don't forget that Great Tusk with an Ancient Booster attached has 200 hit points, meaning a Pokemon like Charizard EX can't one-shot it, and Chenpao EX has to discard 4 energy. Like I said, Great Tusk is a very low strategy deck that forces your opponent to play perfectly while also hoping that you don't mill their best cards. In terms of the ace spec, Prime Catcher doubles as a switch and a counter catcher, while Hero's Cape gives Great Tusk 240 hit points. Both are great, so it's up to you which one you want to use. Other options for Great Tusk don't really exist. You can mess around with the energy counts and trainers a bit, but it doesn't matter. The whole strategy is milling 4 cards each turn. Do that and you win. Oh man, you guys, I've got such a Raging Bolt right now. Early on, Raging Bolt EX in Japan was paired with Sandy Shock EX. After all, why wouldn't you? Raging Bolt does damage based on the number of energy you discard from play, and Sandy Cheeks brings back energy from the discard pile. In a format without Path to the Peak, the combination works perfectly. Then, Palkia VStar was the partner of choice. But recently, as the fun of new cards has faded, Japanese players went with good old Comfey and paired it with Mirage Gate. That being said, is any build of Raging Bolt EX good? Well, it remains to be seen. What I can say is that it's definitely one of the top 5 new decks in Temporal Forces. Just don't be surprised if you find yourself unsleeving it after a couple of days. Because there's so many different ways to play Raging Bolt and none of them are perfect, I'll focus on the card itself first, then show you the different lists. Giraffe Raikou sports 240 hit points, has no weakness because it's Dragon D's nuts, and is an ancient Pokemon, meaning it can use Ancient Booster to reach 300 hit points and Professor Soda to give it energy. That energy is going to be extremely important because Raging Bolt does 70 damage for each basic energy you discard from your Pokemon in play. Yes, this is yet another new archetype that wants to go second. Because if you do, with Soda and an attachment, you can be dealing 210 damage on turn 1, which is underwhelming compared to Roaring Moon EX. But the high HP means it's likely to survive a turn, so worst case scenario you can use Burst Roar to discard your hand and draw 6 cards. Or I guess worst case scenario is passing because all of your catchers are in your hand. Aside from Professor Soda, how exactly do you get that energy in play? That's where Sandy Shock EX comes in. As soon as your opponent takes 2 prizes, its ability activates, allowing Sandy Shocks to attach a basic fighting energy from your discard pile to itself each turn. With 3 Sandy Shocks, you're getting 210 damage. Add in the 2 energy Raging Bolt needs to attack, and it's 350. The huge damage potential is obviously why Raging Bolt has had some success, but like Regigigas, it could have a slow start. This first place list from Japan features 3 Raging Bolt, 3 Sandy Shocks, a copy of the new baby Koraidon to help deal with Mimikyu and put your opponent on odd prizes, and Prime Catcher as the ace spec because item-based gusting is always awesome. Everything in this list is designed to get energy in the discard pile early, maybe launch an attack on turn 1 with Soda and an attachment, and definitely hit super hard from turn 2 on. But what about the other versions? The Palkia VStar variant is one that doesn't hate going first. This way you can set up a Palkia V turn 1, and on turn 2 use Star Portal to flood the field with up to 3 energy while also having access to Soda. And don't forget the Palkia's usefulness doesn't end at its V-Star power. Being able to deal up to 260 damage for 2 energy is rarely a bad thing. Outside of Palkia, the list is relatively unchanged. Prime Catcher's the ace spec, you use Soda to accelerate energy, and 2 copies of Sandy Shocks to help boost your damage deeper into the game. But what if you hate happiness and want to play a Lost Box version of Raging Bolt? Well, here you go! The deck is designed to run the exact same way every Lost Box with Mirage Gate has run since the beginning of time. You get 7 cards in the Lost Zone, then you accelerate energy into play with Mirage Gate. There is one key difference, Soda's Vitality. Instead of solely relying on Mirage Gate, now you have Soda to attach energy from the discard pile to your ancient Pokemon. And there's an Iron Hands EX in here because why not? Ultimately, the top 3 decks in this video are going to have the best odds of consistently winning games. Raging Bolt is going to be fun when it wins, but you'll quickly see why players in Japan couldn't decide on an optimal list. This isn't cheating, okay? This is adapting. There's a huge drop-off after those first few new decks from Temporal Forces, and I had to go digging for a 5th choice. But the backbone of this deck is from Temporal Forces, so I'm counting it. If you ever played the Magnezone variant of Dialga VStar, this is that, except better. Instead of having to commit unspeakable acts to your deck in order to get a rare candy and Magnezone in your hand at the same time just to have 1 energy accelerator on turn 2, now you can easily have 2 energy accelerators at the end of turn 1. Let's start with what Metang does. Once per turn, for each Metang, you can look at the top 4 cards of your deck and attach any basic metal energy to your Pokemon in any way you like. The rest get shuffled and put onto the bottom of your deck. With a total of 17 energy plus a full 4/4 line of Metang, the odds of flooding the field with energy throughout the entire game are high. As you probably could have guessed already, going second isn't a bad idea. This allows you to play Arven for a Buddy Puffin to put 2 Beldum down while also getting a TM Evolution to evolve into Metang. Or you can use Hisui and Basculin to put 2 basics on the bench for free. Then you power up your attackers. Dialga VStar is obviously the main attraction. Its first attack, Metal Blast, does 40 damage plus 40 more for each metal energy attached to it. Get 7 on it, you're doing 320 damage. Which explains why Vitality Band is in the deck. You need that extra 10 for Charizard. And its V-Star attack, Star Chronos, does 220 damage and gives you another turn. Once your Dialga are KO'd, you can switch to Zamazenta, which does 220 damage if one of your Pokemon was knocked out the previous turn. There's also Mew EX, who can copy any attack from your opponent's active Pokemon. And as a reminder, if your opponent has 1 prize card remaining, Mew can use Charizard EX's Burning Darkness and knock it out. And finally, Basculegion. If you find yourself with a ton of energy in the discard pile, Basculegion does 20 damage for each energy in there and shuffles it all back into your deck for free. Everything else is included for consistency. Arven gets you an item and a tool whenever you need it, playing with your balls feels good, Collapse Stadium bumps your Lumineon V or any other liability, and Prime Catcher is the ace spec of choice as it allows you to maximize Star Chronos. There is a world where Hero's Cape could be good, but Prime Catcher is too good to pass up. To be honest, there aren't really that many changes you can make to Metang. I checked the top list from Japan and it's basically just going with a 3-2 or 3-3 line of Dialga to avoid prizing issues, 2 copies of TM Evolution for the same reason, or whacking off and including a copy of Salvatore so you can evolve directly into a Dialga V-Star on the same turn a Dialga V comes into play. And for those of you who watch my Temporal Forces crafting guide, you've probably already realized this, but it costs about 1,000 credits to add all of the new cards. And you already own a 2-2 line of Dialga from the default free deck, making this one of the cheapest decks to build on PTCGL. And that's it. I'll be looking at several more top decks from Temporal Forces over the next week, so make sure you're subscribed. And starting on Thursday, I'll be streaming these new Temporal Forces decks live on Twitch, so follow me over there where everything is kept very family friendly.